Good evening, good evening, good evening. Hopefully everybody can hear me loud and clear this evening. Do let me know if you can or you can't, or if I'm speaking into the abyss, which is possible. But thank you and welcome, and thank you for joining us on Teachers Talk Radio. And you know, it's been, I'll tell you what, it's been a busy day for people. I've been looking on social media. There's been a hell of a lot happening for people. Lots going on, lots to talk about. And I saw this tweet earlier on today by Phil Beadle about marking. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to see if I can speak to Phil about what he thinks, what his thinking is behind this tweet that he put out. Because I think as teachers, marking is, whenever you mention marking, it gets a response. It's never as simple as, oh, it always gets an emotional response. And I think the reason for that is how long people have spent on it in their careers. You know, certainly for me, if I was to add up the hours I've spent marking over the last 14, 15 years, it's a lot of hours. And I think that's why and the fact that sometimes I think people doubt the results of that. And we've seen various reports come out about the effectiveness of marking. We've seen the EEF report, for example, talking about the effectiveness of marking. And that's something that I put to Phil earlier when I talked to him. So in a second, we're going to go to that interview. But just before I do that, if you want to make a comment, please, if you're listening on Podbean, you can make a comment by typing in the chat. If you are listening or watching on Twitter or YouTube or LinkedIn, you can make a comment on there and we'll actually put it on screen. So there's multiple angles where you can actually make comment on the Late Show today from all different angles, really. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, then just do that. Just make that comment, make that call. You can also call in. I'm not saying you should do that. It's a nerve-wracking experience. Is it though? I don't know. I don't think so. Come and have a chat with us. You know, we're teachers like you. We want to hear from you. And yeah, text us, call in, get involved in the conversation. So what I'm going to do now, hopefully, if my technology works today, I'm going to play a little interview with Phil and hear what he had to say earlier on about his original tweet about marking. So sit back, enjoy, make sure you've got a cuppa in your hand, and listen up. Hi everyone. I will edit this later, so I'll edit my little intro out. But I'm joined by Phil Beadle, and I asked Phil to come on here to talk about his little tweet earlier about marking and assessment, because it created a bit of a storm, didn't it, Phil? Also, just to be clear, Teachers Talk Radio does not endorse smoking. We think it is bad. I personally think it's crap, but Phil, in his own words, doesn't care. So
my exact words, Tom.
so I said, fire away, and certainly being on Zoom does help because my clothes aren't going to stink. So there's no danger that's going to happen. But I was going to ask you, maybe before we get into that whole marking and assessment palaver, do you want to just tell everyone real quick your, like, in a nutshell, what you're currently doing and what you've done in your career up to this date?
Right. What I'm currently doing is I'm a part-time school teacher on an estate called the Lakes Estate in Bletchley, and I'm very, very lucky. The school is wonderful, the management is wonderful, my colleagues are wonderful, and the kids are just beyond belief wonderful. Prior to that, man, I've been teaching for 25 years and I've done a lot of things. I've written 12 books. What else? I did write a column for the Education Guardian for 10 years before I got sacked for not really understanding the rules of middle class institutions. In my imperial years, I was on telly quite a lot, but now I'm just the old bloke cursing at the back of the staff room that people think should retire.
I'm sure that's not true, Phil. I'm sure that's not true. Okay, now, interestingly enough, I'll just read your tweet out from earlier first, so we can all hear it and see it, because this interview is going to be streamed on video, but also it will be on video too. So let me read the tweet out. Let me just find the tweet. Here it is. Now, I'll be honest, Phil, you're going to have to help me out here, and this is showing my ignorance. Okay. Apropos.
Yeah, apropos of nothing. So apropos, I believe, I don't know, is probably some kind of Latin or Greek rooted thing. Tabitha McIntosh will tell you.
She'll know.
I believe means related to.
Okay. Cool. Right. Relating to. My school inherited a student 6 weeks ago from a school that's pretty big on being warm, strict, and knowledge rich. She was surprised and delighted to have her bookmarked every day. I asked what her old school was like. They don't care, said she. Now, to read some of the replies to this, we've got Adam Boxer. The idea that the only way to show a kid you care about them is by marking their book every day is pretty sad.
Right, can I stop you there, Tom? Because I think that's an infantile response. It's a complete straw man. I immediately blocked that buffoon. To say I didn't say it's the only way that you care. Mr. Boxer has a habit of arguing with straw men, and I can't be asked to deal with it anymore. So he's blocked. Right, next.
Tabitha McIntosh. Every day, ? Sweet Jesus.
Well, I think there are two elements to that. I'm brought into schools for very specific reasons. So the schools needs a kind of really serious impact on English results. I'm an English teacher. This applies to my thoughts as an English teacher. I'm not a mathematician. My marking burden is very different to other people's. And there are two elements to it. One, I have a preferential timetable because if I'm asked to work in a school and they want me to guarantee that I'll raise results, then I have to teach only 3 periods a day. I will do an after-school class as well. And that has a really substantial impact on one's ability to do marking, right? So you get in early, you mark. You teach, you just say 3 periods in the morning. And then I mark in the afternoon, I mark at lunch, I do an after-school club, and then after that, I mark until I'm no longer able to mark, and then traipse in the direction of the hotel and a really horrible chicken burger. So being on a preferential timetable is one of the conditions that I work in the school, because I prefer, and it's just a personal preference, to have, if I can do it, every single child's bookmarked for the next lesson. Now, sometimes I don't quite manage it, but generally speaking, I'm on top of it. The other element to that is being part-time. Now, the part-time argument, you can do it if you're part-time, is irrelevant in that it was something I attempted to do when a full-time teacher, again, didn't always manage it, often failed, but had it as a personal value that I think marking, and I think we'll probably all agree, is one of the harder elements of the job. And it's a thing that you can't fake. And I know a lot of people on the Twitter universe who are alleged to be, or who allege themselves to be really good teachers. But there is a degree of fraudulence there. And I've been always very, very careful not to be a fraud. And so with, whilst I no longer pontificate very often, I still focus on my own professional integrity very, very seriously. because I don't want to be a fraud in my own eyes or in those of the in those of the kids. And to me, marking is a personal value. So I have it over everything.
Just to pick up there on alleged to be good teachers linking to marking. Now, there would be an argument to say that, and a strong argument, I would suggest to say that feedback, marking is one element of feedback. That I suppose would be part one.
Okay, I think that's bullshit. I think it's utter bullshit. I think that I understand, yes, the verbal feedback is important, but how, and also I understand, of course, that you can do whole class feedback. But if you're reading the books in order to do whole class feedback to find out what they can't do, then why not do it with a pen in your hand? So my perception is that an unmarked book very, very rapidly goes awry. And yeah, because I work generally at a new school every year, though this year I'm in my second year, thank heavens. I come in and see what happens when books are not marked. And yeah, it's quite often what I'll take over will be pretty shocking. Certainly the established working procedures of the young people that I work with, and the view that they don't have to write on every page and they don't have to fill up every page. That, you know, my view is it leads to chaos in terms of what appears to be chaos in the books. And I keep things incredibly tight in the books because I use that as a correlative for behavior management as well.
Can you expand on that a little bit in terms of the behavior, you know?
Well, quite simply, in inner city terms, you don't get away with nothing in this geezer's class. Nothing. Yeah. So if you try and steal a line off him, he's on you. So consequently, if the young people feel that there really isn't any point trying to steal a little bit of space in terms of not adhering to the procedural rules of the school, then it's stamped on rapidly.
Do you feel that what you've just said can be achieved without the teacher putting pen to paper, though? So for example, in the classroom, if I'm stood in the classroom and I'm asking students to do a written task or to start a written task, and I circulate around the room while they're doing it, and I kind of either give them feedback verbally while I'm walking around, or tell them that, you know, they need to up their game, or they need to improve X, Y, Z to kind of stay on course with the rest of the class. That's going to take me a minute, whereas writing that comment on a book would take me, say, 10 minutes.
Right. Well, yeah, I think it's valid. And I do that myself. Yeah, I'll tour after every single piece of written work that I set, just check in. But you don't catch everything in the tour of the class. And so consequently, the mark in the books afterwards, you will catch the things that you didn't catch whilst in the classroom.
Do you, when you're doing the marking, what are you doing? Are you marking for literacy? Are you marking in terms of the content? Are you marking everything? And I suppose, you know, if it's a standard exercise book, because I know you mentioned you've got year 11. So say, for example, it's one of your year 11 groups or whatever. How much time is it taking you per book to mark that? And therefore, do you not think that's a detriment to other things like your planning or lesson planning or being able to do that side of things?
Right, there's a difference according to experience. I don't have to do an enormous amount of planning because I've been teaching for so long. I've taught this or that poem 7 or 8 times. I've already done the planning. So it doesn't act to the detriment of other things. I can understand that if you are a younger teacher, that it's an absurd expectation that you will even attempt to mark every single book, though I did.
So how did you do that then back in the day? How did you do that? Because I've tried to do that. You know, I'm in year 15 now. There's been various points in my career, particularly in my 20s. I'm 36 now, particularly in my 20s, where I, whether in line with policy or not, I did try to mark everything, you in a written sense to to the level that either the policy dictated or that I thought was a good idea to do, but it was unsustainable. So I'm asking you, how did you manage to do that? Because that, to me, sounds like something that lots of teachers would love to crack, to be able to do that.
As I've said, the only reason I can do it now is because I've got a preferential timetable. But when I was a full-time teacher, and again, I did have a preferential timetable because I was an AST, it would, like, my word for it's no good, really. It's, if you ask any colleagues that I have ever had, ever, and they said, what does he do when he's not teaching? They would reply, he is just always marking. In terms of the first question, what do I mark for? Everything. I correct, and my spelling sometimes isn't that great. I correct every spelling error that I notice. I get kids at the beginning of each lesson as part of the routines to copy out each spelling error 3 times, unless the kid's got a pretty serious dyslexia, and then I'll limit that. And there was another element of the question that I've forgotten now. No, I can't remember.
Don't worry. I mean, we'll mention. I mean, some of the other replies. To go through them, I like the fact this is like the generation game. You know, when they had the conveyor belt on it with the little bunny rabbits and stuff, and basically this is like people's tweets that you can kind of discard or you can choose to respond to. So we'll see what your arguments are for each one. But the next one is Ali Yousaf. Student changing schools seems to be unhappy with previous school. Shocker. Question: as an experienced teacher, it is very unlikely that you always take things students say at face value. So do you think she is telling the truth for that, or is it nuanced?
What would be the reason for the child to lie? Really? What would
children do.
Well, yeah, it was a off the cuff question that just said, how are things at your own school? Because she expressed surprise. And again, this is just my class. She doesn't get books marked every day, I imagine, in every other class, right? She expressed surprise and was really quite excited. She's, without revealing too much, she's a very, very nice young lady. I trust kids if they speak to me, generally. This wasn't a behavioural situation in which she would lie, have any reason to lie.
Fair enough. Next one. Nikki Clayton says, we rarely mark books, but we do give constant feedback. It is successful because we have explicitly told students that this form is marking in capital letters.
Well, that's what they do.
But you're saying that isn't marking, that giving that verbal feedback or giving the feedback in different forms isn't marking. So you're disagreeing with that.
As I said, that's what they do. If they find it works for them, then great. I would draw a distinction between verbal feedback and marking. Marking is a much more onerous task to do. I'm lucky in that I enjoy it. I find it a genuinely, that's utterly enjoyable thing to do.
That's fair, but I guess what I'm saying is, do you fundamentally believe that written feedback is better for students learning or its impact than verbal feedback?
Gosh, no, not at all. Verbal feedback can be immensely useful. What I tend to believe, though, is the idea of, we do verbal feedback. Will you explain that to the parents and see whether they buy it? The degree of written feedback that I provide, the degree of written marking that I do, is so that I'm on top of what they need to know. And I'm on top of what they need to know in a holistic manner, in that not a word that they write hasn't been read, and not a word that they write or a sentence construction that they failed at hasn't been corrected. And whenever, say, for instance, they've written a subordinate clause as a whole sentence, I'll put it down as a target for the next lesson. It's about, I tend to think that the we provide verbal feedback thing is a way of managing workload, but to me, it's not the job. To me, the job, if you're going to take it seriously, requires absolute rigor. And to me, marking, as you cannot fake it, you cannot fake it, shows the level of rigor that's being put into the kids' experience and the level of seriousness with which the teacher is taking their education.
Just picking up on that bit that you said about the parents buying it when it comes to the marking, which makes perfect sense to me, because parents like to see things, right? However, the counter argument to this, and I understand that is part and parcel of the education system that we are a part of, is that parents are, if you like, the consumers of or certainly their students are going to a school and they are, if you like, invested in the school and so on, especially if it's a private school or whatever, but even in state schools, they're invested in that school. So, however, should it not be the teacher who is, if you like, the one with the professional autonomy to be able to stand there and say, as much as this written feedback looks good, it takes me 10 minutes longer than verbal feedback, and I could use that 10 minutes for something else. And equally, there isn't really any evidence to suggest that the written feedback is better than the verbal feedback. So therefore, this is why I'm doing it. And therefore, that's why I know you might not like it as much as a parent, but I have the best learning interests of your student at heart. And I think this is the best way.
There's a really interesting distinction between what parents have an entirely reasonable expectation of and what we're able to do. And I hit an interesting anecdote, actually, that I had a head teacher in the first year of my career that I shared a Year 7 English class with. And bless them, they used to, quite rebelliously really, express displeasure at the lack of marking that he did. Name of that head teacher was Sir Mike Wilshaw. Now, I am not in any way, shape or form saying that every teacher should mark every book every day. It is not a possible thing for them. But what I will say is that parents do not regard that as an unreasonable expectation. And I think whilst you're right to identify that the teacher's professional knowledge will be certainly superior to most parents' professional knowledge of assessment, there is still for me an element that verbal feedback, and I can touch on the research, the verbal feedback informed by written feedback is much more effective because it's much more holistic and it's much more detailed. And because I'm 56, 57, dementia's kicking in and I lose my thread of argument. There's no evidence. Fuck off.
Well, there's minimal. There's
has anyone ever done a proper study of it?
Well, I know I think it's the EEF did a study. I'd need to look at what the
yeah, I'd quote David Didow on this, Didow on this. Most educational research isn't worth a toss, really. And I think that this is an area, because you get a study after it that completely contradicts it.
No, I get that, but I mean,
there is currently no solid evidence with a solid research base that marking, in the way that I do it, for instance, has any substantial impact upon results. So I can only speak personally that it does. I've been doing it for 25 years. I get, historically and even now, massive improvements in English results. And I put that down to three things: exceptional subject knowledge. 2, you don't mess around in my class unless it's mess around time, but chiefly to the amount of time that I put into marking. Now, if anybody wants to come in and do some kind of blind study where you've got a control group on it against mine, then I'd be delighted for that to happen, because I think whilst I understand the view of the profession on it, because it's really, really hard stuff to do, I think pointing in direction of research that hasn't been done is incorrect.
Whilst I get your argument taken from Didow about research, I don't. The thing is, though, if someone was to do that in your classroom, wouldn't that be a poor example of good research? Because it'd be one person in.
No, with the control group.
Okay, with a control. Okay. But equally, if you imagine, I remember kind of going back now 5-6 years ago, there was a teacher I worked with. He was an English teacher. And he said to me, kind of confidentially, if you like, on the slide, he said, I didn't mark anything for 6 months last year with my GCSE groups. And they got the best results that I've ever got with a group, or that certainly a group I've taught has ever got. So if what you're saying is true, how do you explain that? Because surely if written feedback was as effective as what you say it is, surely that would be impossible that would be the case.
Well, a lot might depend on cohort. He might have just had a particularly bright group. He might have been teaching.
Well, that was with all those GCSE groups. That was with.
Look, I write well, and I write from a position of great experience in writing. I understand the technical elements of it, and I'm not sure how you can improve. So, for instance, a whole class's ability to write in a variety of different sentence forms without checking whether they can do it. Yes, you can teach them up the front and then they can do it. But if you haven't read the piece of work,
what about, do you buy into the strategy of, what about, say I had a visualizer as a teacher and I chose 1 or 2 pieces of work from the class, and I on the visualizer at the start of a lesson, let's say the previous lesson they'd done a piece of writing, okay, and let's say the start of the next lesson I took, say, 1 or 2 examples that I thought were good, and I put them on the visualizer and I talk through with the students why I thought those versions were good, and then I followed that by writing a version live in front of them myself, and then I asked them to kind of improve or make better what they'd written the previous lesson for, say, an assessed task, or say I repeated that 3 or 4 times, and then the final time was their assessment that I would then mark and grade. But in that intervening period where, say, there was some peer assessment, teacher modeling, teacher instruction, teacher feedback, question and answer, loads of loads of examples, would that not be better than the market than spending 10 hours, 20 hours on over that 4-week period or whatever it might be, putting pen to paper?
Well, I wouldn't choose to do it that way. I can see that.
That's fair, but
I can see how that would be effective. However, what I would point out is that in order to have selected them, you will have had to read them, right? Now, if you're reading them, why don't you do so with a pen in your hand? It's really simple. Yeah, if you're having to read all the books, then it doesn't take that much more time reading a piece than it does to mark. Much more time marking a piece than it does to read it, because you're marking as you're reading. I think there is a very interesting generational element to it, and clearly teachers of my generation kind of moving towards considering retirement have a different value system about this. I find it absurd that a very, very experienced teacher saying that he marks his books and has that as a focus is in any way controversial. And I think perhaps marking is an area in which there is guilt, because people always feel behind it, and if one hasn't marked one's books and you've got a parents' evening, then that's difficult to defend. But the kind of outpouring of, well, it's not really rage, is it? Quizzicalness about an experienced teacher valuing marking, I'm kind of nonplussed by, really.
I don't necessarily. I mean, for me, my problem isn't that you value written feedback or that you choose to do that. My issue personally, I don't know. I know other people would have an issue with that. I don't. My other thing I don't have an issue with is the girl saying to you that she thought that showed care. I can see that she might say that, right? I get that. But on the flip side, I am saying that you could show care in a variety of ways. But
can I stop you there? I didn't suggest in any way that is the only way of showing care.
No, but I'm saying no, absolutely. But you did mention earlier that you said that people allege themselves to be good teachers who don't mark. Now, to be a good teacher, I think you need to.
No, that wasn't what I said. I said there are people who allege themselves to be good teachers who are fraudulent. Yeah, I am very, very serious about not being a fraud. And so consequently, since it is the one thing that you cannot fake, yeah, that takes hours and hours of work, that is part of my own professional self-image as not being a fraud. I didn't say that people that don't do it are frauds. I said that there are people that are frauds.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, my issue, just to come on to what my issue is with it.
Sure, yeah.
My issue with it is that, and I think a lot of the comments reflect this, is you yourself know you have that preferential timetable. You have a timetable that is more viable with the approach that you're taking. I know you get up at 4 a.m. I couldn't do that. So therefore it wouldn't be viable for me because I'm soft as houses and there's no way I could get up at 4 a.m. But even if I could, I probably would still struggle. So my question is does your tweet and do comments like that, if you like, put pressure on people or promote or endorse an unsustainable workload for the majority of teachers who are full-time classroom teachers in schools? Because someone might read that, a leader might read that and say, oh, do you know what, he's right. And they'll be saying that from a perspective where they've, say, got a 50% timetable. And then they might go in tomorrow and say, oh, did you see that tweet from well-respected 25-year experienced teacher, Phil Beadle, who said that, you know, we should be putting pen to paper more because of all these different elements. And it makes you a good teacher if you put pen to paper. Do you not think there's a danger that those leaders will then endorse a much higher workload for the teachers?
Right. The idea that I have any influence anymore is absolutely laughable.
That's not true, because that is not true. I think that's not true. I think that's the thing with social media. I think social media allows classroom teachers, and you are a classroom teacher currently, and that's why, you know, I've invited you on Teachers Talk Radio, because I wanted, and fair play to you, because you haven't just gone, oh, you know what? No, I'm not interested in explaining my position. You've fronted it out. You've said, all right. You've listened to people who've criticised it. Fair enough, right? And so I do think that classroom teachers should have influence, whatever stage of the career they're at. And I disagree that you don't have any influence. So I'm saying that if you do, and I'm right, have some influence. I'm not saying like you've got as much influence as the next person, but I am saying that when teachers will read that. So, and leaders will read it. So.
Right. Okay. Well, two elements of that. Yeah, I don't think that I have any influence really. Certainly amongst any younger generation of teachers, there are people of my own age that are aware that I've done some pretty good work over the years. The intention was not in any way to put pressure on other teachers. I've been there. I know what it's like. It was merely just something that I'd noticed recently in my school, that it does seem that the students seem to take a regularly marked book as an expression of care. I'm not saying that there aren't other ways of expressing care, because that would be patently ludicrous. If people have taken it that and I don't think it is at all likely that any head teacher or deputy head teacher, since I'm perceived to be a figure of the past, is going to come in and say, we've got to change our marking policy because this part-time English teacher marks every book. Like, that's simply not going to happen. I can just about understand why a specific subculture of people might might have taken it to be, God, offensive is not the right word, but some kind of deliberately provocative statement. It wasn't intended to be that deliberately provocative, maybe a little bit.
I disagree with it, but I didn't see it as, I think anyone can say what they want. I mean, I wasn't offended by what you said. I was just interested to know what it was behind it. And I do, you know, I've outlined my position. I do disagree with it, but I wasn't offended by it.
But what I would say though is that I think there's a radical difference between how people on Twitter receive things and how what happens in the majority of schools. So I will go in tomorrow and I'll ask my colleagues whom I love, and I have a great deal of respect for, whether what I do puts them under any undue pressure. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask. I also, there's some lady who I think was a little bit off on one, talked about whether marking regularly hurts kids with anxiety. So I'll ask the few kids I have in my class who are identified as having anxiety and see what they say. Yeah, I am open to be corrected, but what I find often is that it is a specific strata of people on Twitter who, I know you identify as a traditionalist.
I don't feel actually.
Right.
Well, no, that's your perception.
Oh, so
I would say that, but in the sense of behaviour, yes, I would be more traditional in my thinking, but pedagogically, I would say, I'm slanted towards being more traditional in my practice, but I'm also very flexible and pragmatic.
Right. In which case, I apologise. I just thought that was.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's not a problem. It doesn't offend me, but I just had to correct that because I even though yes, I would say that I lean in a certain direction. I ask Kate Jones. We had a big argument about it actually on our last Teachers Talk radio show, talking about engagement in lessons and activities and we had a big debate over that. So I would say I'm more pragmatic than you probably think. However, on I do take your point, but go on, carry on. Let's get bogged down in that.
Just finished. It's a substrata, and I'm sorry for misidentifying you, of Twitter teachers who would identify themselves probably as being more on the traditional side than the progressive side.
Yeah.
Should the progressive side kind of exist anymore? And I have noticed a history because I'm from the dim and distant past, and associated with probably as the kind of most high-profile figure from the terrible bad old days in the, what do you call them, the zeros, or the noughties, the noughties, and noughties. Very early part of this decade. And I do notice that people who align themselves with traditionalism rather enjoy chucking coconuts at a totem pole from the past. Why they do so, I can't imagine. In that I tend to find if people will engage with me and ask questions, and we can have a nice debate like we're having without it being remotely offensive. But if people want to, that's fine. So Mike Thane, for instance, asked a couple of questions and said things today. I disagree with them, but they were expressed in a respectful manner. So I reply.
Yes.
It's the kind of dogmatic knee jerk of you said this. Well, actually, I didn't read the tweet again. The tweet was just designed to say, look, isn't it interesting that kids seem to associate marking with care? I wasn't expecting to be doing an interview about it.
Well, the reason I did it is I think it does, like I said, I think it's an issue that affects, well, a huge number of teachers in terms of marking. I think it's something, and it was an interesting viewpoint, not one that I've seen, shared many times before on social media. So yeah, that's why I think it's been really interesting speaking to you about it and hearing what your kind of justifications are and what your thoughts and feelings are on it. And it'd be interesting to hear after this, if anyone wants to, tweet their comments in or whatever to Teachers Talk Radio, then we'll see what people think, because I'm sure there will be some who will agree. In fact, there was somebody who agreed on the thread that I was talking to you on Twitter, there was someone who agreed with you. There will be those who agree. There will be many who don't agree. But it's interesting to hear, isn't it? It's interesting, and it's something to reflect on.
Okay, Tom, I think we've well and truly dug that one over.
Phil, thanks very much for joining me. It was good. It was a great chat. I will. What other people's experiences are of marking in that sense. I don't know. I think everybody's got different experiences, and I know that everyone is going to have different experiences to me. So I'm well aware of that. I know that, and not everybody is going to see things the same way that I see them. I think. So I mean, I don't know what you think, but tell me what you think. If you have a different view on that, then call in, tell me, text in, tell me. I think that written feedback got a huge amount of weighting compared to other forms of feedback when I started teaching. I feel that If you weren't putting pen to paper in books, it was frowned upon. If you weren't doing your written comments and the students weren't responding to feedback and it wasn't visible in the work, then that was frowned upon. That was frowned upon by leaders, that was frowned upon by parents, that was frowned upon by Ofsted, that was frowned upon by Estin, that was frowned upon by everybody. There was a real weighting towards written feedback, and everything else was out the window. Now that has changed. There has been an evolution. There has been, in the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years, an evolution towards other forms of feedback being just as valid. I think you are now getting into a phase where you can see very clearly that verbal feedback. I mean, if you remember the first time I saw this was in maybe 2013-ish, 2012, 2013, the verbal feedback stamp. When I think about the verbal feedback stamp, I think about the fact that it was completely bonkers, but at least people were recognizing that verbal feedback was a part of the toolkit. At least it was actually becoming part of the vernacular rather than just marking as written feedback. At least there was some recognition that actually verbal feedback could be effective. They got it completely wrong. It was all to do with the monitoring of it, and everyone got really excited. And, part of that was to do with the way in which Ofsted were assessing at that time, of course. It wasn't just the teachers who were coming up with verbal feedback stamps. It wasn't just that. They were coming up with it for a reason. And that was because things were being checked in that way at that time. But nevertheless, at least it was being recognized. And I think that as time's gone on, we've had even more evolution where we've actually had verbal feedback stamps have gone out of the window, and now we're at a place where people are saying, you know what, we don't need to do silly verbal feedback stamps to check this is happening. We do recognize that verbal feedback is something that actually works and is effective. And I wish someone in my teacher training year had come up to me and said, you know what, Tom, it's cool to do verbal feedback. You don't have to do written feedback includes verbal feedback. No one ever said that to me. I don't know what your experiences are out there, but it was just so much like, right, you need to mark 3 times a week, and that is what is valid, and everything else isn't valid. Or at the very least, we're not going to discuss other forms of feedback, like whole class feedback. Mrs. Sorsha has texted in, I think we spoke about written feedback twice in my 3-year training. Everything was verbal, peer marking, feedback and self-assessment, feedback again, success criteria. Depends when you train, Mrs. Salter. I don't know when you trained, but that was definitely not my experience. There wasn't as much emphasis on multiple, particularly verbal feedback when I was training. Maybe people have different experiences. I mean, that was my experience. I'll tell you what we'll do. We're going to go to the news now, but when we come back, I'd love to get into this a little bit more in terms of what your experience is from when you started training, when you have gone through CPD courses, have been in terms of what you've been told to do with regards to feedback. Has it changed over time? Has it always been the same? What have you been doing over time when it comes to marking and feedback? Has it changed over time, or has it been exactly the same? What has your situation been? How has that gone for you? So I'd love to hear that. We're going to go to the news now, and we will be back on TTR in a very, very short period of time. That was Steve Woods, and thank you, Steve, absolute legend with his 2-minute tech updates. I'm now hopefully joined by Adam Boxer live. Adam, good evening. How are you? Are you having a good day? I have a feeling that you were actually on something at some other podcast about 10 minutes ago or something. Someone told me. No, you're all good. Yeah, it's all complicated. We don't worry about it. We've currently got LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Podbean. We've got everything going on right now, and we've got a lot of people listening and watching. So listen, right? Let's get into this, right? Tell me your kind of side of this, because this tweet out is about marking. Okay, should we read the tweet again for everybody? So we. Well, I think it would be appropriate to read it, so then you can kind of comment on it. Let me just find it. Hang on a minute. Hang on, everybody who's listening, because we need to find it. Right. My school inherited a student 6 weeks ago from a school that's pretty big on warm, strict, and knowledge rich. She was surprised and delighted to have her bookmarked every day. I asked what her old school was like. They don't care, said she. Now, you tweeted a response to that, which I'll let you tell me what your response to that is verbally rather than just another tweet. You tell me now what your response to that is. Oh, Adam, by the way, can I just ask you, you're actually muted on your laptop. So can you unmute yourself on the video? Because on StreamYard, you're currently muted. So no one on the screen can actually see what you're saying. We can hear it on Podbean. Correct. No, I want you unmuted on both, but I want your volume down to 0 on your. That's it. All
right. We're here. Okay. All right.
That's
okay.
it.
So anyway,
go again,
okay.
but
loads
start again so we can hear that. And
you want to go again?
Saying, Tom, you don't make this easy. You're always saying
bloody hell, Tom.
I'm trying my bloody best.
Jesus, you just had a 2-minute tech talk and everything. Okay, look, so back then there was loads of marking. Everyone was marking, tons of marking. And the principal justifications in favor of marking were things like it's giving good feedback and, got to get to know the kids' work, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that I was always told was that marking books shows that you care about the student. It shows that you care about the student. And again, by the way, I didn't make this up. Yeah, like someone made it up and said it to me, right? It says that marking books shows you care about the students. I said, fine. So when Mr. Beadle posted about how much he cares students because he marks their books, blah, 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 and the other school clearly doesn't care. I mean, that's the heavy implication. I don't see how you can read it any other way. So I said that my principal objection to the narrative of care is that you can show your students you care in any number of ways. And saying that the only way to do this is through marking students' books is, I think I said, a bit sad. And I think it is a bit sad, to be honest. Yeah.
His response, I don't know if you heard the full interview, but his response his response to that was that he wasn't saying that was the only way. He was saying that was one of the ways that you could show care, but he was arguing that he thought it was a very good way of showing care. I mean, do you think that it is a good way of showing care in your experience? Is it a valid argument to say that one of the good points or reasons for marking books with a pen, doing written feedback, is because the students like it, and that therefore is a good reason to do it.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think. Look, you can ask a kid whatever you like. You know, if I said to it, like, if I took in a kid, but if I spoke to a student and I said, you know that I don't mark your books. Do you think that I care about your books? They'll probably say, oh no, probably not. If I said to a student, oh, I noticed while I was looking over your shoulder during your work that your book is very untidy. Do you think I care about your book? They'd say yes. If I said to a student who had just moved to our school from another local school where they'd had a managed move or a rough time, or like, I think Mr. Beadle was talking about students he teaches in year 11. Yeah, no one swaps school at this point in year 11 if they're happy. It doesn't happen, right? So this kid has rocked up in his school, and he said, you know, what do you think about the teachers back in your other school? They said, oh, they don't care. I said, okay. I mean, like, what does that prove about anything? Like, very, very little. At best, it's an anecdote, but I don't even think it's a useful anecdote, because the kid had a rough time. Like, they moved out of the school. It happened. I teach at an amazing school. We still have some kids that aren't happy. They moved to other schools, and we have kids that come from other schools that are amazing and come to us, and they're more happy with us than they were then. Like, to draw any kind of wider conclusion about that is a little on the far-fetched side. I don't think look. I imagine that there are teachers who spend hours over their students' books, making, like, I'm sure he's really committed. I'm sure he does love his students, and I'm sure he's a great teacher. And I'm sure they think that he really cares about them because of the effort that he puts in, including in terms of the marking and stuff like that. And I'm sure there are plenty of teachers who bust their gut and do loads of things, and they spend hours over the kids' books and giving them feedback and blah, blah. And the kids think they really care about them. I don't do any of that stuff. Yeah, I haven't marked a student book in about 3 years. Now, it could well be the case if you asked one of my kids, do you think Mr. Boxer cares about you? They'd say no. But I like to think that that's not the case. And I like to think that if that were the case, I'd have been told by now by my boss, who is rather forthright. So I'm not really concerned that that's like a flaw in the relationships that I build with the students.
Do you think that, I mean, there's been a bit of conversation there about the research. So when I put it to Phil about the research on marking, he was saying, he quoted David Didow and saying that that most research in his words is BS, and actually that it's not really valid. And also he was saying that there hasn't been much research on the effectiveness of marking. So therefore, it's almost like a 50-50 argument. It's like you saying, all right, marking is not effective because there isn't research, but marking is effective and there still isn't research, if that makes sense. So he's saying that there hasn't been. Now, I know the EEF did a report on it, and I know they said there was minimal evidence within that EEF report. But do you think there's any credence in his arguments there about the fact that they haven't done a proper study? I think was his. He'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was his argument.
Look, I mean, in terms of the research, he's not far off. The EF, they stopped short of telling people that this is not a good use of time, you shouldn't bother doing it. But they certainly found that there were no robust studies suggesting that there's evidence here. Now, the problem is there's tons of stuff for which there's no robust evidence. That doesn't mean those things are a good idea. And here we use something called I'm sorry, Tom, I know it's late, but we're going to get a bit philosophical. One of the things, sorry, someone's giving me a call on my phone. No, go away. Sorry. It's awkward.
It's all right. I've got you back.
Thanks, man.
For audio listeners, Adam just got a call, but he's back now.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't know who it was, so they get blanked. Don't they know I'm on the phone with Tom Rogers, the guy who did the Edudate thing? Anyway, so we're going to get a bit philosophical. So there's a thing in philosophy called a razor. And a razor is not a thing for shaving, not for shaving hair, but it's for shaving options. And it's for taking away options. When you don't know what the correct answer is, you use a razor to remove options. So the most famous razor is called Occam's razor. And Occam's razor is the simplest explanation, is the one that's most likely to be true, or is the one you should go with. So if you have two explanations for a particular event, one is complex and one is simple, you run with the simple one if you don't know. There's another razor which is called Hitchens razor, which is named for the late great Christopher Hitchens, who said that which is proposed without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So the point is that I don't need to even consider the fact that marking is a good thing until there's evidence. So saying to me, well, there is no evidence yet, blah, 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 is all fine and dandy, but I don't need to consider it until you provide me with some kind of evidence. The second someone comes up with a randomized control trial that says, right, we're going to take 2 teachers with 100 kids each. They're going to dedicate exactly 5 hours to each class. One of them is going to do it in comment-based marking. The other is going to spend it working on their explanations or their drill practice sets or retrieval practice, or is going to give verbal feedback, or is going to mark their carousel homework. Plug number 1, carousel learning, the greatest online tool since sliced bread. But anyway, so as soon as someone does a randomized control trial on that, then I'm going to be like, okay, and they get results that say the comment-based marking wins, then that's what we'll go with. But until that point, I don't even need to consider it. That was a bit fast. Did I talk too fast?
Too fast for me, which is what most people talk. But I picked up the main gist of it. Yeah, just about. I suppose what I was going to ask you is then, because there are still, even if there is a teacher, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, let's say there's a teacher out there, like as Phil says, he said he likes marking. He enjoys marking. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what would you say to a teacher who was spending a lot of time marking, okay, but also said, I enjoyed it?
Yeah.
Would you say that's okay? Or would you say, you know what, based on my experience, maybe you're going to burn out, or maybe you're not going to have time to plan lessons or whatever? I mean, basically what I'm saying is, if you had to choose, Adam, between written feedback and planning a lesson, which one would you choose, or would it just be a 50-50 throw up?
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, there's a spectrum here, and it depends on the way that you lead and the culture that you have within your department. So I'm very blessed. I'm the head of a department. Blessed and cursed at the same time that I'm the head of a department. And there's like a strong spectrum at play here. At one end of the spectrum is the traditional approach, which is taken in UK education circles, which is live and let be. There's no best way overall. Anyone can do what they like. I trust the teacher to do what's right for their students, that kind of thing. That's at one end of the spectrum. But the other end of the spectrum is you turn around and say look, I mean, if you, it's not about what you enjoy, right? You're on company time. You need to be doing stuff that is useful to the students. I don't think that either of those poles are particularly helpful. I prefer a kind of robust middle. And I would say to a teacher, if one of the teachers in my department was taking home stacks of marking and spending hours doing it, I'd be saying to them very simply, look, we have an agreed departmental teaching and learning policy for the science department in this school. There are a number of things on it. There are a number of things that are not on it. One of the things that is not on it is comment-based marking in books. If you're satisfying the rest of the policy in all of its detail, then I have absolutely no problem. If you enjoy marking books on your weekend or in your evenings, whatever, it's your choice. If you want to do that instead of watching Netflix or logging into Teachers Talk Radio, be my guest.
How dare
what? I put you on the same level as Netflix. That's a good thing.
Fair,
a bit sensitive tonight. You're not the one who's called a buffoon. I was called a buffoon.
No, we're going to come on to that, Adam. Don't ruin it.
Joy.
We're going to come on to that.
But and if that teacher said yes, Adam, I can do that. I can satisfy every line of the teaching and learning policy, and I can get everything that you've asked of me that we need to do as part of the department. Contributing to resource curation and getting all my assessments done, all of that. And I want to take these books home and I want to mark them on the weekend, then I'm not going to stand in the way of your hobby, right? In the same way that if his hobby was going to watch, go bird watching or metal detecting or whatever, I wouldn't have a problem with it, so long as the job was getting done. Now, the likelihood is that, that's never really happened to me before. The likelihood is that if a teacher is doing that, they're spending work time doing that as well. And I would very politely ask them to make sure that they were doing all the other stuff first.
Yeah. I suppose the point that I was concerned about, one of my concerns was the idea of teachers getting burnt out, and also the idea of the timetable. I know Phil I don't know whether he's tweeted you. I think he's tweeted something, but it was
No, I'm
something
blocked,
on.
mate.
Okay, well, it may not have been to you. It may have been a comment, but he I don't know where this comment. Someone's just messaged me. But he's asked, have you got what kind of timetable do you teach? I'm not sure why he was asking that, but that's what.
Who, me?
Yeah.
What do you mean? I teach a standard head of department timetable.
Yeah, that's.
Hang on. I mean, I have fairly unique circumstances. I'm a full-time head of department, but I'm in school 4 days a week. I do 1 day a week. I work on carousel learning, which is lovely and enjoyable. Yeah. The other 4 days a week, I'm on a standard head of department timetable. I directly line manage the biggest department in the school. I directly line manage the department in the school that has the biggest budget. I mean, what is this? Is he like trying to like get me to drop my trousers and cock measure how many hours I work? Like, what is what is the point here?
Someone's just texted in and said, I don't know. But the point is this. I think that
someone in the comments has just asked me to not. That's fine. It'll get blanked out automatically on the video.
I mean, this is everywhere, so there's no way of blanking anything out. I'll read some of the comments, actually. Mike Hill has texted in, and by the way, people who are watching this won't be able to see this, but this is on Podbean on the app. Mike Hill, even if marking has a positive effect, this still wouldn't change the fact that the time needed to mark books stacks catastrophically. Even if a teacher spends just 6 minutes per book, that's 3 hours for a class of 30. If a teacher has 9 different classes, that's 27 hours to get through all of the books once. Okay, more. We've got, who else has said things here? We've got...
Sorry, did you want me to comment on that? Sorry, you left
I did.
pause.
I did, go.
All right, well, first thing is, I mean, Mike generally is a legend. And yeah, he's dead right. Like the time investment is farcical. And also, by the way, in his calculations, he said that a teacher spends just 6 minutes per book. I would think most teachers can spend a bit. Well, actually, he's a history teacher, so maybe it does take 6. I don't know, Tom. You tell me. But 6 minutes a book. The problem is the first book takes 6 minutes. The last book, it's like wading through treacle. It's death. You're like, oh, I just can't do this. And you're staring at the page and you're losing focus. So I think there's like everybody knows about exponentials now because of COVID. Yay. But it's like exponential in terms of the amount of time it takes.
Yeah. Another comment that Phil made in the interview was about so he was talking about the fact that he would see himself as a fraud if he didn't mark. If he didn't do that, it was almost like he was saying that is an integral part of the job for him and in general. So therefore he would see himself as a fraud if he kind of stood there and said, oh, I'm a great teacher, but I'm not. And he was pointing to Twitter and saying that he feels there's a lot of fraudery on Twitter in terms of people who aren't, a lot of corruption, if you like, in the presentism of people as good teachers, and therefore they're not doing the job because they're not marking or they're not assessing pupils' work. He was also talking about, I guess the parents as well, talking about the impact of marking with parents and how he was arguing that was something that was a positive thing for parents to see that books have been marked and so on. I mean, what would you say to those things?
Look, again, I mean, if Phil's fan, look, I personally do not feel like a fraud. Yeah, I get in, I do my hours, I work hard, I do everything that I can for my students. I don't mark their books. I mean, I don't really feel like a fraud. I also make no pretense claiming that I'm a particularly brilliant teacher. I don't know if he was referring to me in his comments, but
he didn't specifically mention it. He was talking in general.
That. But look, I mean,
calling you a buffoon, but the rest of it.
Yeah, that was very specific. So look, I mean, he can feel however he likes, and that's fine. All I can say is that if he worked for me in my department and he was doing that much marking, we'd be having a strong conversation.
I mean, I might ask you, what do you actually do then? I mean, in terms of, you said you don't mark. I mean, what do you
Minecraft, hours of Minecraft.
But apart from that, I mean, in terms of your marking and feedback approach, what do you actually do? I mean, what do you do? Yeah. What do people in your department do? What do you tell them to do?
Okay, so I mean, we're giving feedback the whole time. So if you took a typical lesson, every lesson starts with a do now, which is 5 to 8 questions. Every question receives, students receive feedback. We circulate extensively, so every student will receive immediate, directed, corrective feedback on their work, and that's just in the first 5 minutes. Students do at least one carousel quiz a week. That quiz will be 15 to 20 questions that we do. I say we mark, but it takes about. If a class of 30 who've done a 15-question quiz, it takes about 5 minutes to mark. Because they do the bulk of it themselves. They self-assess, and all you're doing is moderating. You then select particular questions for whole class feedback. So if there's a particularly interesting response, something that's really good, something that's really bad, something that shows a misconception, that then feeds into the next lesson's whole class feedback, which again is done automatically by the platform. The teacher just is the one who then picks it up and runs with it in the classroom. So they receive feedback on there. They receive feedback. You do an explanation, and then every explanation is followed by check for understanding. So they receive feedback on the check for understanding. They then begin to independently practice, and they receive feedback as they begin to independently practice, because we're doing circulating around the room. We don't really do plenaries because those have died, fortunately. But you can probably work out by now that there's feedback laced through the entire lesson. Once a fortnight, students do a pen and paper little quiz. It's called a Find Out Fortnight, which has 10 straightforward knowledge recall questions. It has then 3 marks, which is a bit more application. It might be an equation, it might be a graph interpretation, something along those lines. The bulk of that is peer assessed, and then we take them in, check the marking, couple of ticks, couple of crosses here and there when necessary. And then again, there's feedback in to the next lesson. So we look at a lot of their work, we give them a lot of feedback, but and don't get me wrong, we work hard. Like, this stuff isn't easy. It's just not the same as comment-based marking. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. And we have 2 big assessment points a year. And then
what would you say to those maybe parents or teachers or whoever who would say, well, that's lazy, that's typical lazy teachers who just don't want to do what has always been a fundamental part of their job?
Do these people exist? I've been doing this I've not marked a student book in 5 years. That includes a very affluent, middle-class, leafy, suburbish school. And at that school, one student, I taught hundreds of students there. One student asked me if I could mark her book. And I said, sure, I can do that for you if you want. And I marked it for her. And it took me a couple of minutes, and I gave it back to her. And it told her nothing, but she wanted me to do it. So I did it. What difference does it make to my life? But in all that time, and believe me, I have received some very punchy emails from parents, sometimes legitimate, sometimes not legitimate. There's no head of department in the world who has not received punchy emails from parents. There's not head of department in the world who has not deserved some of those punchy emails that they received from parents. Not one of them has asked me about marking.
Yeah. It's interesting though, isn't it? Is that if you did survey parents, would they? I do wonder what they would say is good teaching. Do you think that if we survey parents right now, I'm sure Ofsted already have, but if we surveyed them and said what is good teaching, what would they actually say? Do you think what would they include in that?
But look, fundamentally, who cares? Yeah. I very much want parents to be on side. Buy-in is so important from parents, but only because it helps me achieve outcomes with their child. Fundamentally, I do not live to serve the parents. I live to serve their child. That's why. But this is something it's a brilliant point that I read about 8 years ago in Ed Dorrell, who used to be one of the editors at TES, and I used to read the TES every single week.
I know him well. Yeah.
Absolute legend. And he wrote this beautiful. Yeah. He used to write the lead. What was it? What's it called? The right at the front. The editorial. Yeah. He used to write the editorial. Him and Anne Moroz, they used to alternate. Yeah. And Ed once wrote about the fundamental difference between the public and the private sector is that in the private sector, the person you're serving is the customer, and the customer is right. Whereas in the public sector, you are serving something else entirely. So my job is I'm the servant to these children's future, right? I live to secure for them the best future that I can. I do not live to serve their parents. It's not my job to satisfy their parents. It's my job to look after the children. If I can do that with the parent, then so much the better. And I try very, very hard indeed to do that. I phone, 15 parents a week, right? I do a lot of work trying to get parents on board. But fundamentally, if a parent, say, opposes a detention, okay, if I can't win them over, it's tough. The kid's still getting a detention. If the parent asks me to mark a book, I say to them, look, I'm really sorry. I'll happily mark your kid's book as a one-off, but I'm not putting it into the policy. It's not an option, because I know better than they do, and I live to serve their child's outcome. And if the child says they want X, but I think that it's better for them to have Y, they're getting Y. If the parent says, I want my child to have X and I think it's better for them to have Y, they're getting Y. And I believe me, I promise you, I want to take the parents with me on that, but if I can't, then I won't.
I mean, just to finish off, Adam, because we're running out of time now. But the last thing I was gonna say to you, your original reply to the tweet was the idea that the only way to show a kid you care about them is by marking their book every day is pretty sad, to be honest. And I know that Phil had said that was an infantile response, and that you were a buffoon,
and then called me names.
And then said you're a buffoon. I wondered what your response to that was, and whether you.
What response to him calling me a buffoon?
Well, he said that's a straw man argument, what you said. And
maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, I thought I was reading his tweet fairly, but maybe it is a straw man. Who knows? It's Twitter. You write something in a sentence when you're on your way downstairs to go to the toilet. Like, who cares? I mean, it's really a case of just get over it.
Adam, thank you very much for joining us, and you take care. And thanks for dropping in. Mate. Always a pleasure. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
That was Adam Boxer. There he is, and you are still with us on Teachers Talk Radio. Wow, what a show! My God, it's been interesting, to hear from Phil Beadle and then Adam Boxer. I feel like I'm like kind of like in the middle of a sandwich, a marking sandwich, with one side kind of like coleslaw and the other side like corned beef or something. Got a lot of likes on the show. Thank you, Miss P Teachers, for your like on the show. Thanks, Mrs. Sauce, you're always listening. Noam. Cheers, fella. Noam is texting saying the result of this process, teaching marking, must be under attention. Let them say he is lazy. And we've got Daniel listening. Cheers, Daniel. Maddie, cheers. That's how you pronounce your name. Apologies if it's not. We've got Matt. Complex, goodness me, we've got 35, 40 people listening. Carolina, thank you. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I don't know what your thoughts are on all this. I don't know what the conclusion is. I'll let you decide that, because that's what we like to do on Teachers Talk Radio. We want to present both sides of the argument and let you, the listener, decide what you think and have a little reflect on it. So do tweet us at TT Radio 2022 and tell us what you think about the debate that you've heard today. And if you missed any of it, if you didn't catch it, then you can listen back at ttradio.org/listen back. This is going to be available as a podcast in about 5 or 10 minutes time. So you'll be able to listen back to the show if you're so inclined. And then you can draw your own conclusions and tell us what you think, and do share on as well, and do share, because I think it's an interesting debate to have about this. And I think, as I said, I think things have evolved with marking assessment. Maybe other people might say they've evolved in a bad way. Who knows? There's lots of different opinions out there. Anyway, everybody, that's it from me for today. See you next week. Oh, next week? Yes, next week for me. But obviously, make sure you tune into Teachers Talk Radio, because there's shows every day, including tomorrow. You take care, people. See you later.